Thanks.
Sure. My name is Dana Tija Tram, the current serving chief for the Vantakwichin First Nation, self-governing in the Yukon. I just had a quick question for the panelists abroad, and feel free to comment to any aspect of it that you would like, but I'm interested in the long-term, your past experiences with the freezing and thawings of different mandates coming down to the tables and leadership vacillations in Canada, especially in conjunction with your blue sky of what the best picture is in these fiscal relationships. But specifically, do you think that Canada has saved or cost themselves more money in these major vacillations at the fiscal tables? Merci.
That's an amazing question. In the first few meetings that we had with Carolyn Bennett, or Minister Bennett, I brought forward the quote from the World Health Organization that for every dollar you invest in young people, you save $7 in social costs. It's a quote I've used countless times. And she was quick to agree with me that perhaps it's more that for every dollar we do not invest, we have more and more social issues, more and more of our people lost in our society. So it's not just affecting our people, it's affecting our society as a whole. We can't afford not to invest in our young people. And it's a social issue that we have to grapple with collectively. So when we saw the opportunity for the collaborative fiscal policy development, we were happy to engage in that process and take an active part in that process because we could see the potential to help our young people in the long term, help our people to help ourselves. Thanks.
Thanks for the question, Dana. The problem with the fiscal relationship is, to date, had always been, well, one of the problems was it was very costly to do the negotiations, very time-consuming. We were joking at breakfast this morning that we had seen, I don't know, like 8 different negotiators at the FFA table over a period of a few years. So that's very challenging, and of course shifts in government. I think we are fortunate we had the right environment to fix the fiscal relationship, and to repeat something that Mr. Haberl here was saying at a different room earlier, because we worked together on the collaborative fiscal policy process, taking that work and then implementing it through some negotiations was actually a much more efficient process. So I think when Canada works with Indigenous governments on their policy, and this was the first time they've done this kind of collaborative thing, you get to a place where it should be much easier to implement and a lot more cost effective for all parties. So I think that's a really good thing. And might just say one thing to the previous person who asked a question. From my perspective, a strong fiscal chapter is required. In Canada, I know people within Canada would say, we put a lot of detail into these fiscal chapters and they just get in the way, we need more flexibility. I'm paraphrasing, I'm sure they can articulate that better. But from my perspective, a strong fiscal chapter is really key. You don't know what kind of government you're going to face on the other side. Things change over the long term. I think having a strong fiscal chapter is key to being in a good place, to be able to work with Canada on fixing policies or negotiating or whatever. I think a strong fiscal chapter is key.
I can't really answer the question because I have no experience with, quite frankly, most of the processes that have been talked about today. But from a broader fiscal perspective, I think, if I can put it in terms of the risks, I'm not an economist, but when I look at the assumptions on which the budget is based, they're assuming, for instance, continuing GDP growth at a constant rate. That's probably a vulnerability. if you remember the chart I put up that showed the fiscal anchors, the government is predicting that deficits will continue, though they will decrease. A lot of people are very skeptical about that. So you've only got to have something internationally that causes, heaven forbid, another major recession. That will put the government in a lot of trouble. And that will put pressure on the government in terms of its budget development, in terms of how much money it's willing to continue to flow. And I heard in the previous session that there were a lot, and I think the guy who was talking about it has left, that there were a lot of buckets which hadn't been attended to yet and were only partially filled. So that's the sort of risk that I think is faced. And clearly the issue is to keep pressure on the government to keep up with its commitments. And that, of course, exposes you to the risk of regime change, if I can call it that. So that's not really helpful, and I'm not intending it to be helpful, but I think it's a realistic risk that you've got to keep on the horizon. And in terms of however you are continuing with the various processes you are running, is at least to have at the back of your mind some strategy for dealing with that and trying to get a sense of if it's going to happen. It's a difficult thing to deal with, and I'm, as I said, I'm no expert. I don't have enough knowledge on your processes to give you any advice, but it just strikes me that it's a very definite risk on the horizon.
I guess I'd just like to answer your question with a really quick, yeah, it's cost. I don't think there's any question about that. And I don't know if I'd call it vacillation. I think what happened is a lot of the treaty mandates and fiscal mandates were done internally by the bureaucracy, and they reflected bureaucratic interests. And then they became government policy, and when that happens, they're enormously hard to change. I've been around long enough now to see that in a lot of cases, we didn't get the change which was beneficial and helped First Nations grow until a whole generation of original bureaucrats disappeared. I could give you a whole number of examples, but I guess what I'm saying is I don't think vacillation is the right word. I think it's just this real bureaucratic inertia, and we're seeing it again. We have thousands of funding officers, but if we're really serious about self-government, we're going to be in a world where there's a lot more decision-making power within a First Nation, and do they really want funding officers looking over their shoulders? And I don't think so.
Okay, now you guys started me up. So another one, and I'll try to simplify this as well, and I appreciate you bringing up the 2008 meltdown as well. And we are now in a new precipice where, let's be honest, the banks knew they were getting bailed out, whereas in Iceland they enjoyed a nice jail cell. In North America, they walked away with some pretty good bonuses in their pockets. So president has been set on this, and there's already rumblings and whisperings over the next financial crisis, which is pending. It's a matter of time. There's also other interesting international projections coming to do with China's economy doubling in 2050. But what I wanted to isolate it to is that if we are in the long road of implementation, and a big part of the fiscal certainty that we've derived by breaking away from paternalistic funding models, what would be, in your mind, best practice in positioning ourselves through these fiscal relationships to move forward knowing about this next big fiscal upset?
Thanks for that second question. We just had a meeting with our settlement trustees, and we had a recommendation to diversify our investment. So that's one step that we are taking. The other step is trying to make our investments in self-sustaining projects. For example, having an assisted living in our own community we're paying ourselves to take care of our people instead of paying the facilities that are in the nearby cities of Terrace and Prince Rupert. We're trying to ensure that we have investments in projects that are there for the long term. We know that there will always be a need, and it'll take us many years to ensure that we're providing the best opportunities for our young people. But we've been working diligently as a government. We've gotten to C6 level of delegation for child protection, which means our own people are out there helping our own children and supporting the families. We're not just going out and apprehending children, we're supporting our families. So we're making a diligent effort to improve the lives of our families. But for the finances, we know that there are opportunities to improve every aspect of how we handle our resources. We are making sure that whenever we negotiate an agreement, we have the best people possible to assist us so that we can ensure that we have a maximum revenue generation agreement possible, not only from the proponent but from the province. We are part of the BC Regional Mining Alliance along with the Taltan because there are projects in our region, and we know that there's an opportunity there to be a part of any project that is carried on in our region, not just for the dirt jobs, but for capacity building and for collaboration and sharing of resources to ensure that we're investing in our young people and those who have a desire to improve their lives. So it's an issue that we've not focused on specifically, but it's an issue that is like the elephant in a room. We have to be aware, just like the decision that we made this past week to diversify our investments. We're bracing ourselves for that day when there's another market crash. In our slide for the settlement trust investment, we know that there was a decline in the value, market value of our investment, but we're grateful for the wisdom of the decision makers to ensure that we didn't have all of our investments in one pot. And we will be prepared should the market decline again. And it's like a cycle that we know we're headed for. So it is a business cycle. And we're as prepared as we can be. And we don't trust ourselves wholly to make decisions. We have trustees that provide us with their guidance and wealth of expertise, and we work with them, and we trust their guidance. And for any of our investments that are not meeting benchmarks, we make a very quick decision to ensure that we're on it. So I know I didn't capture all of the answers that you were seeking, but I hope I touched on some of them. Thanks.
Okay, thank you for that, and this will bring our session to a close. Just before I close, just to touch a little more on what Corinne was stating with our Nisga'a Nation, and we're going to be diversifying about 15 to 20% of our equity investments into real estate and infrastructure and debt as well. That's going to allow us to be able to contain what's forecasted that's coming, like the economic hit that's going to be coming again. So we're in a position to be able to do that now. We've made amendments to our treaty to allow us to do that. So that's one of the things that we're going to be doing. And we had big growth this year, but we're not going to see that same growth in the next maybe 10 years. So with that, I'd just like to thank our panelists for their presentations, and I'd like to ask that each of you give them a nice applause for the presentations they made. Thank you.